I think we'll have a few more people trickle in as we go along. Just wanted to say good morning and good afternoon again. My name is Aaron Taylor. I'm a senior consultant here at Team DWC. Thank you for joining us for the second webinar in our Inside Grants program for 2026. I hope you all were able to join us with the cost allowability webinar last month. I'm excited to have you here today to talk about budgets. I'll do a little ad to say next month we're doing procurement, and we'll soon have information about our monthly webinar series coming up later this summer. I'm verifying. There's a couple people saying they cannot hear anything. Is that consistent across the group? I see Ashley and Pamela. Okay.
I can hear.
All right. I would encourage anyone who's having trouble hearing, just double check their audio settings in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm confirming the audio is on my headset. All right, thank you for all the feedback. So we'll go ahead and hop into things. I will keep an eye on the chat. Mostly we're going to be doing Q&As at the end. We'll be happy to answer any questions, and that's one of my favorite parts of doing presentations is answering tough and hard questions. At the end of last month's webinar, we had some really great questions. You're always welcome to reach out to us and follow up as well, and we'll be happy to unpack questions you have at the time in addition to that. So today we're going to be talking about budgets. For a lot of people, this is something they don't love doing, but we're going to say they're really important and they touch all parts of your organization or all parts of your awards, and that everyone has a role. A little bit of information about Team DWC. So we were started by our owner, Dave Wickstrom. He's pictured here doing a training. He and the rest of the team have been part of training a huge amount of federal grantees. Our team, including myself and the other consultants, have a ton of federal grant management experience covering human services, housing, education, all different sectors. Many of us joined Team DWC after being let go or leaving federal government in the last year, and we're really excited to be serving on the other side. We hope to take through this series Inside Grants, our insider information, and share it with you and give you true insight to how federal funders look at federal grants, do compliance, and what their expectations are for grantees. Our hope is to give you the insider edge to be awesome at doing grants and to learn all those areas that you had questions about before or we're hoping to get more information on. I'm going to be the lead presenter today. I'm Aaron Taylor, senior consultant at Team DWC. A lot of times, Dave, our owner, will be joining. Dave and Jackson, one of my great colleagues and our partnership manager, are in DC at a conference this week, and they're leading that effort. So I'm stepping in and we'll be joining you all throughout today's webinar. So one of the first things I mentioned about budgets is that they're not just numbers on paper, right? Budgets are a roadmap for mission delivery. And for those that don't really like budgets, that aren't number crunchers, I'm more of a number cruncher, can get excited about them because they tell the story financially of how you're doing the mission work. They're also showing a pathway to your growth and sustainability as an organization, particularly if we're talking about an organizational budget. Lastly, really to federal funders, and this was something coming from my role in compliance position, they can demonstrate your level of stewardship. And if you're a good stewardship, in the case of federal grants, of federal taxpayer dollars. Are you boosting a good return on investment? Are you showing that you're mindful of the rules and requirements? Are you achieving the outputs and outcomes of the award? When I had the opportunity to work with grantees, a lot of times I would speak with financial staff and management, but I would remind them that everyone at the organization has a role in the budget process because our salary and fringe are being paid through the budget. We're delivering mission through the budget. We're buying supplies and pencils and papers and equipment. We are paying the rent through the budget. So all the things that the organization is fundamentally doing, all its pieces and parts are part of the budget. So we all have a role in that process. When we're talking specifically about federal grant budgets, because at Team BWC, we're federal grant experts, the key rules and requirements we want to look at, we start with the program documents. So if you're applying to a competitive award, this is a new award that you're going out for and you're going to submit an application, you want to first look at that NOFO or NOFA, right? So that's the Notice of Opportunity for Funding or the Notice of Funding Availability. You want to look at that document and digest what are the pieces and parts of this? How do I form a budget that aligns to the program requirements or program parameters? You also want to look at the application materials because depending on the program or agency, they might have a certain way for you to submit the budget, how they want to see it, how they want the numbers calculated or tabulated across multiple years. If this is not a competitive program, let's say it's a formula program, you really want to dig into the authorizing statute because that's going to lay out how the program's designed and specifically explain what the eligible uses are for funds. You'll also want to look at the uniform guidance, which we talked a lot about last month in our allowable costs, and we'll talk a lot about today because those are the core regulations for managing federal grants, whether they're mandatory formula or competitive or discretionary. And lastly, if your program that you're working on does have codified regulations, you'll really want to go to those because that's the agency spelling out to you their expectations for how a program should be managed, how it should be run, and how a budget should be set up. If you have any questions, and when I was on the federal side, I always encourage grantees to do this, is to reach out and ask. The more information you can provide, the easier it is for the federal funder to give you an exact and proper answer. One of the hardest things I had as a federal employee was a grantee sending a vague question, then I have to give a vague response, and I think we both leave that frustrated. So if you do have concerns, particularly if you're applying to a new program, go ahead and voice them to the funder, because that gives them an opportunity to respond. And you might actually be asking a novel question that they didn't think about when they were composing the NOFO or NOFA. So then they can issue an updated FAQ that will help you and potentially help all your other partners who have the shared mission goals. So last month when we talked about allowable costs, which are a core part of budget, right? Because we should only be budgeting for allowable cost, we focused on the uniform guidance 2 CFR 200, subpart E. Today, we're going to stay in subpart E, but we're also going to add D and F. There's going to be a big focus organizationally and process standpoint on subpart D, and then for actual cost and expense that you're adding to the budget on subpart E. Subpart F is added as a piece for audits. And for those of you that are doing single audits, you potentially have a cost allocation plan or an indirect cost strategy to help pay for required audits. When you come back to these slides and you download them from our website, I wanted you all to have this resource as a reference. So these are key sections of the uniform guidance that help to explain the expectations, the parameters, the requirements that you need to have in place to support your budgeting processes. Particularly in subpart D, you want to have clear, defined, codified financial management policies and procedures, and clear, codified, and consistent internal controls and checks and balances. These go into your budget development process, but they also demonstrate to an organization that you have competency and capacity to manage the budget throughout the course of the federal award and to competently deliver on financial reporting and closeouts. We're going to be coming back to a lot of these numbers as we go through today's presentation. But again, I would like you to use this as a resource to help learn the expectations of uniform guidance and where key passages are, but also to remind you about some of the key things that federal funders are looking for when they're reviewing a grant or reviewing an applicant for potential grant funding, or they're doing risk assessment of an existing grantee. Speaking of risk assessment, when a funder is looking at an applicant to become a potential grantee, or they're considering whether compliance review is needed of an existing grantee, there's several factors that they're going to look at. A lot of times at ACL, when I was working on formula grantees, there was an assumption of, well, every year we just get a new allotment. So we don't have to submit an application, or there's not a lot going on from a free award standpoint. And I would tell you that there actually was. A lot of the grant management systems for the agencies that are set up now do pre-award checks, regardless of how the awards are made. And those pre-award checks look at, cause you to look at things like SAM and FAPIS and the other federal systems, whether your UE is up to date. And they will create flags that prevent the organization from moving forward with executing the awards. So use this as a resource to think about, okay, when I'm applying to federal funds, or if I'm an existing federal grantee that consistently gets funds through a formula process, I do need to be mindful of what my presence is across the federal grant sphere and the systems that manage and document the work that I'm doing. I had an interaction with a grantee recently where I was explaining some information that I got from their schedule of expenditures of federal awards, the CFA, on their single audits. And I was explaining that I saw inconsistencies across award expenditure documentation from year to year, and I couldn't see how the expenditures added up to the grant award, which in itself is a concern because it's showing some inconsistencies in financial tracking and reporting of the award, which dial back to, budget tracking and budget management. And this was ever present because this information is publicly available in the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So for those of you that do have to do a single audit, be aware that the federal agencies have individuals that are reviewing the single audits. If there's findings, they have audit liaison officers that are doing follow-up on those findings. And if there's insufficient response on those findings, then those create a mark from a risk assessment standpoint that could impact your existing federal funding or cause issues for your access to new awards or new programs. So when we get down to brass tacks, when we look at an application and look at your budget, there's some key things that your budget is doing or is telling to the federal funder. One, it's showing how you transform the concepts and objectives and strategies into an executable plan, right? So your budget is the backbone for the work that you're going to be doing on the award. It explains how you're going to administratively manage the award, and it explains how you're going to deliver on outputs and outcomes. It's also your baseline for showing how you're going to manage the flow of dollars. How are you going to track revenue and track profit and track expenses to ensure that costs are properly monitored, that are shown to be allowable, and that they're documented and accurately reported back to the funder? So you're also going to be explaining how you financially deliver the award, and you're going to be demonstrating your understanding of fiscal compliance. One of the easy ways this will come up is whether the expenses you have added into your budget are actually permissible or allowable under the program. And again, we talked about all different ways in which the program can communicate what's permissible, what's allowable. The baseline is uniform guidance that runs across all federal grants. Then you have program regulations, you have the authorizing statute, and you have any information that they've added into the notice of funding. One of the things that surprised grantees from year to year when I worked with them in the federal space was standard term and conditions. A lot of times new standard terms and conditions came into play for awards without much fanfare because they were put in place because of changes in the political environment or changes in political initiatives. Sometimes those terms and conditions have no impact. Sometimes they do add a new reporting requirement or might change how you approach the work you do. I know one of the most confusing ones lately has been the BABA regulations. And there hasn't been really great explanation from the federal side explaining how that applies to projects, what an infrastructure project means, and those types of things. If you're not following with each new award, particularly the underlying terms and conditions, then you might be missing out on meeting the requirements of the award, but also aligning with the expectations of the federal funder. We've broken the budget development process out into 3 parts. I think this budget works whether you're setting up fresh, a new application to apply for a brand new grant, or whether you have a grant that continues from year to year and you need to update a budget for a specific award. In stage 1, you're doing the preliminary work. You're putting all the pieces together. Stage 2, you're really getting down and estimating costs and articulating what each component or each cost category is going to, how much it's going to cost, what the projection is going to be. And in stage 3, you're doing refinement, those final reviews, checking everything for alignment with the requirements, and making sure that you're adhering to the federal expectations, whether that's a specific budget format or alignment with the standard form. So in stage 1, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, there are key resources you go to developing your budget. Those key resources include that NOFO or NOFA. They also include the application packet, the authorizing statute, the uniform guidance, and any sort of program rules, regulations, or policies. As you're assembling the background information you need, the pieces and parts to build the actual budget for your award, we outline 6 key areas that you should really focus on. Funding limitations, right? Are there limits to the size of the award or the availability of funds? How long is the project going to last? Is this years? Is it split out into different parts? Do you have to do budget updates to the organization at the end of each year? What is the project structure? Is it singularly focused? Is it going to have multiple satellite locations? Is it going to have different checkpoints? Cost share and match. Is there a cost share requirement? Is there a match? Who's going to own that requirement? And how do you get that money? The budget and narrative format. So is this budget format consistent with how you normally do budgets for your awards? Is it totally different? Do the cost categories align to your chart of accounts? Are you going to be able to easily slip into this? And then what's the page limit? And how do you write a narrative that's really concise to communicate a high level of specificity without being too limiting and without taking up too many words against your page limit? Are there specific unallowable costs? Particularly, are there unallowable costs that would normally be allowable in other programs? If there are, what are you going to do to pivot? How are you going to manipulate your own process and make sure that you get enough reimbursement to adequately deliver the project? And lastly, what's the available funding? And this is kind of a risk reward determination. So if the maximum award is $400,000 and there's $2 million available, well, if everyone gets the maximum award, then there's only going to be 5 awards given. Is there going to be 100 applicants, 200 applicants? How do you position yourself? Is this a good investment of time to go for this award? Do you feel like you're a really great fit? Available funding can help you to break that down and give you a return on investment for the front end work component to determine whether your opportunities of getting the funds really make sense. As we go into stage 2, we're going to go more intimately into breaking down the cost categories and really looking at what is this project going to cost and how am I going to determine that amount. We're going to ensure that the cost categories that we're looking at in our organization and how we define cost can properly fit into how the budget form or how the organization defines what those costs are. And we're going to look for any limitations and always be thinking about unallowable cost. And then we're going to run the calculations and start estimating the real cost of what this project is. How much do we need to run this project? As we're thinking through stage 2, I've outlined some key questions here on the slide, and those are things we're going to unpack as we go through this part of the presentation. So what are our cost categories? And probably that bigger part, the sub-question, are these costs that we normally process as an organization? Do we usually charge expenses for this? Do we know how to do these costs? Do we know how to do this work? What method will you use to collect indirect costs? Are indirect costs even allowable? Is there an admin cap on top that could impact our ability to collect indirect costs at the normal rate? Are you going to be doing this alone or with project partners? If you have project partners, what commitments, what letters do you need to get from them? What information are you counting on them to garner? Are they going to do cost estimates for certain parts? If you're doing subawards, what does that look like? How do you distribute responsibilities? Do you have the capacity and policies and procedures in place to successfully do that on the back end? Are you going to do procurement, big, little, RFPs, or simple purchases? Will this include travel? Again, always coming back to that cost share and match. Particularly if this is not normal for your organization to have to do match. How are you going to do this? Is that going to be cash or in kind? Is it going to be materials or space? And if there's a program income piece, we're going to specifically talk about that. You need to know what method of program income is accepted by the organization, and then what that results in as an impact to your budget. Is it taking money away, or is it adding money on top? So one of the first things we usually think about, a lot of the organization I worked with, the highest piece of the budget was salary and fringe. So particularly, how do we start breaking down cost estimates? Well, first, start with the members of your organization that are already there and that are going to be joining up in the award. What do they cost, right? What is their salary? What are projected increases in their salary as you go into years beyond the fiscal year in which you're applying? What is their fringe? And then what is their time and effort and how it's going to be distributed to the award, right? From a most basic standpoint, we would do cost allocation percentages and start to break that out. Then you can do the percentage times the total cost, wage plus fringe, and that starts to give you an estimate of what the cost will be for existing staff. If you have new staff that you're going to hire to join the award because you need additional capacity or you need additional expertise, then you start to go to the industry databases, or you reach out to colleagues that have individuals there that are in your market to price out what it's going to be to bring them on board and what impact that's going to have on the S&E investment for your budget. As you're thinking about new staff, don't forget about the stuff you will need. That will be space, supplies, materials, equipment to support the new staff. So incorporate that into your budget, or have a way through your indirect costs or general funds to be able to pay for that. As you're thinking about anything salary for staff or fringe benefits, always review 2 CFR 200, 430, and 431, because they really break down what the standard is and what your expectation will be for actually demonstrating work done on an award and payment of salary for a specific person, whether it's part or in whole. Next month, our webinar is going to focus all in on procurement. So I'm not going to go too deep into procurement requirements and breaking down the different thresholds. What I would ask you to do and start thinking about before the next webinar is going to the uniform guidance, specifically 317 through 327, and start to look at the new thresholds, look for the updates, and really start deciding whether your organization's policies and procedures align with the current requirements, the current thresholds. And if you need to start doing some updatings, particularly since the 2 CFR 200 thresholds changed significantly, especially for HHS awards in the last 2 fiscal years. In our basic example, we're basically saying that If you plan to do procurement, small or RFP, you need to know your cost range. For small procurement efforts, like the example on the screen, we have a vendor that we're going to reach out to and do training. We need to get the cost per training, and we need to have that estimate ready to add into our budget. So in this example, we reached out and they said through November, JTG partners can provide the half-day training at $4,000 per training event. If it goes beyond November in your project timeline, then you need to either go back to JTG partners for an updated estimate, or you need to add 5 to 10% on top to ensure that beyond November, you'll have the money within your budget and your grant award to actually pay for this key piece of your award. If you're setting up for an RFP, you need to look at the elements of the RFP and start defining a ballpark estimate of what that's going to cost, because you will need to have that ballpark estimate into your budget and ready to submit as part of your application, so you have sufficient resources in order to deliver on the service you hope to procure. Travel costs were one of the most common areas of non-compliance that I saw when I did reviews of grantees as a federal employee. Specifically, there was either no travel policies defined by the organization, or the travel policies were not up to date, or maybe another example is the travel policies and internal controls weren't actually adhered to by the staff, either because they're inadequately trained or because they always had to do travel reimbursements or travel approvals in a rush. In this example, I would remind you to go to the cost principles, right? And specifically the selected items of cost at 2 CFR 200.475 for guidance on travel. Most federal grantees will default to the GSA standards, particularly for hotels and per diem, and the IRS mileage standards for, in-state travel and local travel. For the example, I provided that 2 staff members need to go to a multi-day training, and I showed how I break down the components of that cost, including airplane travel coach for 2 round-trip tickets, the GSA standard in Philadelphia for hotel rates, and multiplying that by the number of nights, the per diem for GSA, accounting for both first and last day, so partial day travel and full day travel, and then also estimating for taxis or Uber. This gets to a round number that I would probably round off to 4,100 or maybe 4,200 to account for any changes through the project timeline, but gives a clear basis that you're going to a verifiable data source in order to predict the cost of things, and you're using a consistent methodology. Now, cost share and match is often one of the most challenging things when it comes to federal grant awards, particularly if you're not used to working programs that have a match or cost share or leveraging requirement. If you're new to doing a program with a match requirement, ensure that during the budget process, you're thinking about the policies and procedures and controls and tracking mechanisms that you'll need in place to separately track, match, and ensure that you have supporting documentation. If you have a federal grant and fail to meet the match or cost sharing requirement, it can have pretty severe implications at closeout for impacting, substantial non-compliance actions. Also, you have to really be thinking about, okay, there's a match and cost share. How am I going to achieve that? Is that going to happen through cash, some in-kind service? This could be donation of rental space or donation of materials. Does the program allow for you to do unrecovered indirect costs as a match? This is a common thing that we see at the state level. Are you going to be able to tap into other non-federal sources? Or could you potentially use program income as cost sharing? To understand the intricacies on program income, the non-federal funding, and the unrecovered indirect cost, you're really going to need to look into the NOFA or NOFO, or the program rules and requirements, or potentially an FAQ on the funding. Again, as I said before, if you don't know, you can't find the information through a good search, Ask the funder and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this for match or cost share. What do you think? Is this allowable? And I think that's a really great thing to do. One, you have that in place in case you have an audit and an issue comes up. And two, you're being definitive and sure from an internal controls and checks and balances for your organization because you're preparing the budget or making updates to your budget using the best information available. For more information about cost share and matching, you can look at 2 CFR 200-306. The biggest thing that I saw as a challenge for grantees was ensuring that they had consistent processes in place and defined individuals within the organization that had the expectation, that had the oversight responsibility for actually tracking and documenting match. We talked about program income as a key component to think about in budget. The first question is program income going to be generated from this program or from this award? If it's not going to be generated, then don't worry about it. If it is, and you've never managed program income before, you need to have a clear plan in place. You need to have capacity. Again, like with match, you need to have a process and a way for tracking this. And you need to know what the program roles, standards, and expectations are for program income. Under the uniform guidance, the default for program income is deductive. That means if you earn program income, you should deduct that from your award amount, such that the program income is going to make the implementation of the award cheaper for the federal government because it involves less new grant dollars going out. Programs that I worked at ACL, they'd often define program income as additive. So this means it was added on top of the award. When you look at the uniform guidance, it often says that any program income used or program income earned during the performance period of the award has to be used during the period of performance of the award. That way, even if it's additive and you get to the end of the period, if you haven't used that program income, then you have to give it back because it's like leftover grant award funds. In the last example, we show a chart where program income is not only additive, but it's used as a cost sharing component. So the purple block is showing that the program income is offsetting the cost share requirement, which reduces the expectation on the grantee or in the applicant to provide additional non-federal funds to meet the match requirement. So as we get into stage 3, we're talking about finalizing the budget, right? And this is really about refinements. At the start of each stage, we've tried to lay out key questions or key factors to be thinking out through that stage, thinking through during that stage of the development process. So particularly in stage 3, again, we're going to think about finalization. How do we get to that final budget sheet? How do we make refinements? How do we check for those key requirements, particularly those ones that we're having to deviate from standard processes because the requirement's new or it's different or it causes us to track or to cut funds in a way that we're not used to. So always the biggest one we start with question-wise is, are the expenses allowable? When we went back and reviewed the NOFA or NOFA for the first time, we were looking for unique unallowable costs. Are there costs here that would normally be allowable in other awards, but aren't allowable for this program? If there are, we need to key in on that and make sure that we exclude those costs at any and all points of our budget development process, but particularly at the end, we're always doing a final check and balance to make sure that they're out. Like I brought up in the cases of match and program income, if you've never had to do match on an award or you've never had program income on an award, make sure that you have the capacity, the processes, and the systems in place to do this work. If there are new mission delivery activities on the award and you're bringing in new staff or partners, really make sure that you've locked down all of those pieces in place. They're clearly communicated in your budget, and they're going to be aligned to the narrative we're working on in this section. Always check the calculations, right? One of the first things I had in place when I joined HUD as a federal employee, I saw internally that someone had transposed the number on a application review sheet, and that was impacting about 30% of the applications that were submitted to a program. They had put in 1.24 as the multiplier, and it should have been 1.42. We all can make mistakes. We're all fallible, but make sure to double check or have a friend come in and do the additions as well, and make sure everything's in alignment. One of the biggest things that we're always going to say with budget is how is it connected to mission delivery? And is the budget that we outlined going to position us for success to deliver on outputs and outcomes? And then that last question is about management review, right? Reinforcing our policies and procedures and internal controls in place. Has the budget gone through appropriate departmental review or management review to align with our normal checks and balances? Putting that into a graphic, right? We're talking about final checks going into the blender or the tumbler. We're getting rid of unallowable costs. We're identifying any program limitations. Where are we stretching and how we're compensating for that? We're checking that everything we do, that we have policies and processes in place. We're asking ourselves, asking the management team, the budget development team, is this actually realistic? Can we do the work that we want to do at this amount, at these costs? And then lastly, we're checking those calculations. Does everything actually add up? Do our subtotals make sense? Do we get to our final projected award amounts? Then we'll send for management review. And then we go to that last step, which is if this is new application or you're working in a grant management system, translating your budget into the organization's budget form. Ideally, you're starting with that budget form from the beginning. But we all know if you have awards from multiple different funding partners, particularly multiple different federal agencies, they all use different budget forms. So that might not be practical at the beginning. So you have to make sure by the end that you're aligning to whatever budget form, whatever budget requirement that's in place for the program that you're working on. This could mean that you have to consolidate some cost categories and merge them together. If you do have to make any changes from your baseline budget to the agency's budget form, just to note this for the record, that way you know when you go to do reporting, or if a new employee comes in, that they understand how to translate your chart of accounts or your system into that agency's budgeting and cost categories. And probably the most annoying thing is that SF424A form that federal grantees often have to fill out, or almost all the time have to fill out for federal grant awards. And it has about 10 categories on it, and you got to merge a whole bunch of stuff together. Again, keep notes of any consolidations you do in order to align with the required forms for applying to the grant or to align with funder standards. That way you can unpack it on your end and make sure that you're always consolidating, reporting, and close out financial information in the same way. And probably the last thing you think is, once I get all my budget together, now I have to translate it into a narrative, into my application to really describe what I'm doing. In my experience in reviewing federal applications for grant funding across 5 agencies, you're always looking for the right balance between clear justification and consolidated response. And that consolidated response is either to align with the page limitations that are in the NOFO, or because if it goes on too long, the federal reviewer likely just gets bored and or it introduces more area for picking apart and confusion and for misunderstanding. So on this slide, I gave a couple examples to reinforce the topics that we already talked about in step 2, the salary and fringe and travel and contractual, where I look to take the budget line and just translate it into a 1-sentence response. And ideally, you'll see that pages with a blank, I'm linking it back to the actual part of the narrative response where I'm defining project implementation and project delivery to say, hey, This budget line's reinforced to mission delivery, to output and outcome production on this page, and it reinforces, why the budget is this and what my assumptions are. That way there's continuity and also like an easy index for the reviewers to go back. Because a lot of times when they're doing reviews on federal awards, they're linking multiple sections in order to give you a score in one component. All right, we got to the end. You got the award. What are reminders about budget responsibilities once you go into award implementation and reporting and closeout? Well, first is budget negotiation. What if you don't get what you asked for? How do you go through negotiating with the federal government? One, to adjust the budget to the actual funding level, and two, scaling outputs and outcomes. Then you have potentially budget amendments through the course of the award. And the budget amendments could be, hey, I had to get rid of this person and add this person on, or for some reason our training person dropped out and we're not going to have as many trainings, or potentially you need more time, right? What is the process for budget amendments? What does that look like on your side? What forms do you have to submit to the funder? And how do you have to account for any changes to your outputs and outcomes? You have to actually be able to track charging of cost to awards. You have to document the award cost with adequate supporting documentation. You have to update the budget and actually reconcile your use of funds against the budget amounts. And then you have to prepare and align that for financial reporting in whatever form or method that looks like. Lastly, prepare for closeouts, look to that long term, what am I moving towards? And then internally, be prepared for audit review and any level of audit standard that you have, whether this is a basic financial audit or if this is going to be a major program on your single audit. So just to wrap things up, giving you a few reminders from both the pre-award or budget development side, and then post-award, right? Budget reconciliation and implementation side. Always ensure that your cost estimates are properly scoped and researched, right? An emphasis on scoped, because that's the only way you're going to be successful in getting good estimates. Confirm that the projected costs you have are reasonable, that they're realistic, and they're actually going to lead to achievement of the outputs and outcomes. Verify that your budget, the cost categories, elimination of unallowable cost, the format all align with the funder requirements, and ensure that you actually have the financial management capacity in place to do all the work on the back end, whether that's budget reconciliation, cost share and matching tracking, program income tracking, reporting, or closeout. Into post-award, actually go back to that budget on a regular basis. Have a timeline and schedule to do reconciliation and actually track that the budget is proceeding as it should. If it's not, take appropriate actions, potentially even reaching out to the funder to say, hey, things are changing, this is what's going on, but we can still stay on course, right? Funders always want reassurance. Maintain regular communication with the funder to reassure them, to keep them in the know, and closely track reporting and closeout requirements to make sure that you're on time and accurate. A lot of times funders are using AI, right? Or they're having staff just double check that there's consistency in meeting the baseline requirements. Because if there's not, that's a really easy step into further review and potential non-compliance discovery. Just a quick advertisement for Team DWC. Myself and our partnerships manager, Jackson Bunton, have been doing a lot of reach out to grantees to see if there's potential opportunity for partnership. Hopefully through today's call and through the other Inside Grants webinars, you've seen that we are federal grant experts. We have a strong desire to help grantees grow and improve and to maximize their use of federal grant funds. We can support you through customized training, hands-on support, consulting and audit readiness, or customized technical assistance. We all have a strong passion to serve. We like numbers, we like federal requirements, but we're also extremely mission driven. And we want to see federal grantees be successful. And we want to make sure that they have all that important information that funders don't usually share, so they can be empowered and have the insider edge. We do have another webinar coming up next month, focused on procurement. And I know that's an area that's often a concern or a challenge or a worry or anxiety inducing for grantees. So if you haven't signed up, we encourage you to go to our Inside Grants website and sign up and continue on this journey with us in Inside Grants throughout 2026. And I'll turn it over and see if there's any questions that have popped up.